So welcome and greetings to all of you for coming today to our 8th in a series, the Family Friendly Earth Care series from Family Development. My name is Kelly Kunkel, and I'm a health and nutrition extension educator with the University of Minnesota Extension. And Rick, you want to bring up the poll?
And so the poll should be up. Fruits, and 56% of the people have foraged fruits, and the next highest is greens at 50%.
Excellent, thank you.
The other thing I'll point out is that if you find the auto transcript distracting, you can go to live transcript and hide that on your individual computers.
Thank you, Rick. Rick is our webinar producer today. We thank him for being here. He will be helping to monitor the question and answer. So as you have questions, as Gary goes along, if you can put your questions into the Q&A part of the tab, the chat, if you want, you can use that for any kind of technical questions that you might have. We will take those questions at the end. Gary has about 45 minutes that he'll be talking, and then we'll take about 15 minutes for question and answer. And with that, I'd like to introduce Gary Wyatt, and he will be presenting on foraging in Minnesota woodlands or your own backyard. Gary is an agroforestry extension educator and professor with the University of Minnesota Extension, and his regional office is in Mankato. Gary promotes sustainable agroforestry practices that are economical and protect our water, our soil, and our wildlife and natural resources. Current issues include silvopasture, living snow fences, invasive species, windbreaks, buffer strips, forest farming, bioenergy crops like willows and poplars, ecosystem services, trees and shrub selection, community and school food forests, edible and decorative woody plants, and non-timber forest products. And Gary has been with Extension for over 38 years. So I'm going to turn it over to Gary. Please join me in a virtual round of applause.
Thank you, Kelly. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
And thanks, Rick and Sarah also. And thank you for joining us today. If you want to also put anything you see on the slide here, the names of the edibles that you see on the first slide here in the chat, please do before I say what they are. Some of them are certainly recognizable for some of you, I think. Anyway, yes, I've given a presentation last year at the U of M Arboretum in their series of webinars, and it was also well attended. So we're assuming people will look back on this and maybe gather some more information. I do have a lot of slides. I'm going to go fairly quickly. We are going to record this, and this is being recorded. And then also I have a supplement email that will be going out. Sarah and Kelly, I think, will be sending that out with the web addresses that I talk about, and also some book references that I talk about at the end of this presentation on foraging. And yeah, we'll get started here. Anybody mention what these were? I guess I should look at the chat and see. Oh yeah, Saskatoons. Yep, that's far right. And then hazelnuts. Yes, far left. Aronia berry in the middle, and morel mushrooms. Good for you. And serviceberry, Saskatoons, and Juneberries all synonymous on the right-hand side there. They look like they're ready to pick. And I think that's a photograph of mine, actually. Okay, let's get started. Good job, everyone. So my goal in today's presentation is to give you a small taste, no pun intended, of many possible plants that can be foraged and gathered in our Minnesota woodlands or your own backyard, and to encourage you to learn more about these foraging possibilities and to be safe. So first rule of wild foraging is it must be sustainable. And certainly we get in the woods and we see a batch of morel mushrooms, let's say, and actually they're coming up in southern Minnesota. I have them around my place, which really is not common, which is interesting. And you really want to pick them all. if you're on public land versus private land, that's a different decision on private land. But if you're on public land, you really need to leave some for the next person coming after you. So that's a decision that you need to make, and as a forager and so forth. But and it may depend on the product or on the edible that you're looking at. If it's almost ready to pick and tomorrow it's going to be too late to pick, then maybe you can pick some more June berries and Saskatoon service berries off that plant. But try and think sustainably. So my outline for today's presentation is we'll talk about wild harvest, woodland, and the hunter-gatherer of edibles. Also, we'll talk about a wild harvest in your home landscape, or your lawn, your driveway, your backyard, those types of things, because we do have some plants that grow around home yards that you can eat. Also, we'll talk about forest farming, which is an agroforestry practice. We'll talk about edible fruits and nuts that you can plant in your home yard or garden as well. If you don't have a landscape that you can go to and hunt these edibles, you can actually plant your own edible landscapes. And then we'll talk about some resources that are available, both online and book form. So what I'm not going to talk about today is spend a lot of time on our fruits, our apples, grapes, some raspberries, although I do have some raspberry slides on the wild side. We do have a lot of information at the University of Minnesota Extension, apples.umn.edu, grapes.umn.edu, and then also Z-Link. So many of our links are z.umn.edu, and this one's on fruits, and we have a great fruit website for our extension page. Extension is basically extension.umn.edu for our main extension website. Wild harvest. There was a great presentation that James Burnham from the DNR gave last year in the Minnesota Outdoor Skills and Stewardship Series. They have this every year. I think it was started during COVID, but he did a presentation on ramps, fiddleheads, and also morels. So it was a great presentation, and actually you can look at that. You can look at past presentations at the DNR website. There's just the Minnesota Outdoor Skills and Stewardship Series that you can look online. And actually, I will have this as part of the reference that you'll get in an email of how to reference these websites. So you don't have to write that down necessarily, but you can Google it certainly if you remember that. But they've got a series actually coming up this summer on even fishing and hunting and gathering, all kinds of nature walks and different things that you can learn more about. First slide is talking about our public lands with our Minnesota DNR. So if many of us don't have landscapes, we can forage in the wild. So we look at state parks, state forests, state natural areas, and WMAs and so forth. So we're going to look at these charts here. And this was out of James' presentation that I asked to use from his presentation last year. So no foraging is allowed on the state, scientific, or natural areas. So be aware of that. State parks, you can hunt berries, mushrooms for personal use. For commercial use, you cannot. So you can't hunt morel mushrooms on state or federal. Well, federal might be different. You need to check on that. But state lands, you cannot hunt and sell any products from berries or mushrooms that are hunted on state lands. But if you want to use it for personal or family use, you certainly can. So again, berries, mushrooms for personal use in state parks, berries, mushrooms, and personal use at state forests as well. And then the wildlife management areas and the aquatic management areas, which we do have a lot of in Minnesota, you can hunt for fruits, seeds, mushrooms, and portions of plants for use. And obviously, when you go to the state park or state forest or WMAs don't have a person at those locations, but if you have an office of the state park office or state forest office, you really need to let them know or ask the first permission to go in and do some foraging at those locations. It's just good practice to do, is ask permission. So some of these other lands, the national lands might be a national forest. It could be a wildlife refuge or waterfowl protection areas under the national type organizations. You can certainly ask permission for that and see if they allow that to happen, foraging. Also, our county and city parks and regional parks have a wealth of wildlife areas and conservation areas and wild woods that are available to them and trails and so forth. And they may allow foraging in those areas. So be creative, and if you've got a city or a county regional park near you, ask them if they allow foraging, and maybe they'll even tell you what areas to look at. Here's just a simple harvesting collection calendar. Real quickly, it starts with the antler sheds when deer sheds antlers in February and March and April. Pussy willows are our first woody that is a pollinator that comes out, and certainly there's a lot of maple syrup and birch syrup. Actually, some people are tapping black walnut for syrup as well. And then obviously all of our or most of our fruits are harvested in the fall, except for our June berries and serviceberry Saskatoons are early, and some of the currants are early. Honeyberries are early. Honeyberries are not native to our wild landscapes, but I'll talk about that a little later. But those are kind of coming up in June that are not shown in this particular calendar. We have tons of berries native to the upper Midwest and Minnesota. You know, June berries, as we mentioned, the Juneberry, Saskatoon, serviceberries, they're all kind of the same family. And they're really nicely edible off the plant. Strawberries, plums, cherries, choke cherries, currants, under gooseberries, rose hips, boysenberry. I'm not familiar with that one up in northern Minnesota. Thimbleberry, raspberries, loganberries, another one. Elderberry is very common. Blueberry, cranberry, nannyberry, wild grape, high bush or American cranberry as well. All these are available in most of our woodlands. So I've got a few slides on safety and foraging I wanted to mention. So never forage alone. Always use a buddy system. At least have one person with you. Tell someone where you're going and when you'll return, just in case something happens out there in the woods. Also know the area where you're foraging. And if it's a new area, get a map and learn a little bit more about the area before you go in. Always get permission and permits if needed. And certainly you need permits to harvest some of these plants, like a wild rice, let's say. You need actually a license to hunt that and harvest that. Go out earlier in the day, but also take a flashlight with you, and obviously cell phone may or may not work in some of the areas that you'll be hunting, because some of these are woodlands that don't have cell phone reception, so you'd be aware of that. But obviously that's probably a good fail safe, and also good for a camera and take pictures of where you're at and what you're seeing. Take a backpack and water and snacks in your backpack, a knife and scissors, TP just in case, and maybe some extra bags to collect the edibles along the way. Wear proper clothing and shoes and rain gear, certainly goes without saying. Put your Boy Scout cap on. Also, some other rules, know what you're picking. I think that's the key, and maybe have some reference materials with you. Maybe take along a couple of people that may be knowledgeable about what you're planning to hunt for and forage for. Collect only what you can positively identify as an edible. Harvest only plants that look healthy. If it's a dying plant, don't touch it. You're really probably asking for troubles if it's a plant going downhill. Clean thoroughly and properly and prepare these types of edibles at home. Eat small quantities when first trying a wild edible plant. Get property owners' permission before gathering edibles. Certainly, if you're hunting on a property that's not yours, you really need to get permission beforehand. And actually, they might even direct you in some of the areas that they have seen edibles before. Again, the emphasis of getting permission to go on property that's not your own is very important. And do not overharvest. I think that can't be mentioned again and too many times, especially if it's a public area. Take only what you can use, and actually the premise is leave about 80% or more of what's there. And obviously, if you're coming across a leeks or ramps area that's well kind of developed and producing a lot of plants, maybe you're going to stretch that. And morels is certainly an area that you're going to probably take every one. But we're try and refrain from doing that, especially in public areas again. This is the 5 steps of identifying edible plants. I thought was very interesting from the Forager's Harvest, a book by Thayer in 2006. So I'll just read some of these things. I thought they were very important. Tentative identification. So never identify a plant by a single characteristic. Make careful observations about key characteristics. Comparison. Compare the plant to a reliable resource or reference, and carefully and thoroughly and critically. And then also use both the description and illustration or photographs to confirm your finding. And certainly if you're taking other people as references on the hike, on the foraging trip, you can certainly ask them and what their experience is too. double and triple check. It can't emphasize that enough on edibles. You just don't really want to eat the wrong plant, especially mushrooms is really a critical thing. So compare several references, locate more, gather more specimens until you and if effortlessly recognize the plant. And if you need to look at a book to identify the plant every time, then you may not be ready to eat that particular plant. Assess and directly contradictory confidence. Certainly, you don't want to say, "Are you really sure?" If you're unsure about something, don't eat it. Under no circumstances is it acceptable to taste or eat any part of the plant that you can't identify. So those are key findings, and that's out of the book of Foragers Harvest booklet, or it's a book by Thayer in 2006. We'll talk about that as a reference. Again, there's a few, most generally of edibles. You probably don't need a permit for state lands, but you do need permits for several woodies or decoratives that you might want to harvest out in the woods. So mushrooms, morel, chickenwoods, chanterelles, chaga, those are all edible mushrooms, but you need to correctly identify them. Trees and seeds and cones need permits. Leeks and ramps do not. Fiddleheads do not. Berries do not. Wild rice, you need a license actually to pick wild rice and collect that and harvest that. Hazelnuts, wild grapes, you don't need anything licensed for that, but you do need permission again. A lot of people hunt for balsa boughs in the fall time of the year, and actually DNR, Minnesota DNR has a great website on how to harvest properly the balsa boughs, and you need permits and permission to do that on state lands. And then also willows, you can actually collect walking sticks or bed willow sticks that are sold at tourist stores in Minnesota, and you can need a permit for that as well. So let's start out with some of the spring foraging types of plants. And this is actually taken from the DNR lesson that they had last year, and he did a really good job on it. And we made some Z-links here, a Z-link on ramps, and then also morels. But here you see a basket full of morel mushrooms, also leeks or ramps or onions, and then also the fiddleheads. I don't know if anybody's had fiddleheads or not. You can certainly comment on the chat if you'd like on that. And yeah, ostrich fern, the fiddleheads, and we'll talk about more of these in just a minute. So leeks or ramps, wild onions. So early spring, and probably already happened in some locations of the state already. They really come out early. Some just cut the leaves. Others may take the whole plant. But remember, if you take the whole plant, you've really taken that whole plant away from even growing for next year or reproducing for next year. So you want to be concerned about that and sustainably harvest these plants. And a lot of people are recommending that you just take the top part of the plant for the leaves and then eat the leaves. Fiddlehead fern, the ostrich fern, is a native fern. You can see in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, that's the way the winter seed heads look. So if you have a location in the wintertime that you've noticed that area, then in the springtime, the fiddleheads, before the ferns come out, actually this is part of the stem of the fern, is called the fiddleheads. The very first emergence of this plant is called a fiddlehead, and it's edible. Now you have a picture of the middle screen there of a bracken fern and an ostrich fern. And so you want to make sure that you're clipping off the ostrich fern for the fiddlehead instead of the bracken fern. Bracken fern is known to be poisonous to livestock and humans, so you want to be careful about that. Early spring, April to May. In fact, I live in southern Minnesota, St. James, Mankato. My office is based out of Mankato. I live further west in St. James, and my ferns are already up and going now. So you may have missed a narrow window in southern Minnesota, but in northern Minnesota, you may still have an opportunity to look at these landscapes that might have the ostrich fern. There's 44 ferns in Minnesota on the Minnesota Wildflowers website, which is a great website, and I'll go over later. But you want to make sure you're picking the right fern for edible fiddleheads. Morel mushrooms are up in southern Minnesota this time of year, and this is usually it's the first part of May in the southern part of the state of Minnesota, and then actually morels have been found on almost every country in the world, which is fabulous, just amazing. Early in the season, May to June, very distinct sponge-like head. There's some lookalikes. There's a false morel. You don't want to pick that. I think it's a more darker color morel. I should have probably put a picture here to show you. but it's a little bit different and a little bit stands out that you don't want to pick it. And they're coming up now in the southern Minnesota area. Chicken in the woods mushrooms, pretty common, found throughout the world also, called chicken in the woods because it tastes like chicken. How about that? And found on wounds of trees, mostly oaks, but very recognizable in the woods is bright colors, yellow and orange, and you can't miss it. A lot of vegetarians use it for a substitute for chicken. It can be frozen, and but some people have mild reactions, so you always want to be careful about mushrooms and eating small amounts. Chanterelle is another mushroom that's sought after in July and September in Minnesota. It's a hardwood or conifer forest. Beware of the three lookalikes that can cause some upset stomach. Jack-o'-lantern, false chanterelle, and woolly chanterelles, and do not eat raw. So you need to cook these types of things. And we'll talk about the State Society for Mushroom Hunting, Mycological Society. If you're really interested in mushrooms, I recommend that you belong to that Mycological Society of Minnesota, and they have a great newsletter and so forth, and a lot of forays that they go around the state and actually hunt mushrooms and educate people on mushroom hunting. Chaga on birch or poplar, elm, and alder. This is harvested in the wintertime. I know it doesn't look very attractive, but yeah, this is an edible mushroom, believe it or not. They cut off the exterior mass, the break away from the tree. It's on dead and dying trees, and it's sought after by some people, and it's a folk remedy for illnesses. I think that's all of our mushrooms that I'm going to talk about today, but obviously mushrooms are probably one of the most sought after forage items, and you want to be careful of positive identifying the mushrooms. Blueberries, obviously very popular in Minnesota, especially northern Minnesota, boundary waters and so forth. Two native varieties, common lopebush and velvet leaf, found in July and August of the year. Northern forests, also in moist sand pine and oak barrens. Thimbleberry, another almost raspberry looking plant, can be bigger than some of the wild raspberries that we have along the trails and so forth, but usually in late July, early August, may be found in large quantities. And the ripening is different on this plant. So you can see it by these pictures. You may have one ripe berry, and then obviously some that were not overripe and not pickable, and then some just starting. So the berries are inconsistent, as in some of our berry plants. Certainly it doesn't all fruit at the same time. So you want to eat fresh or in preserves, and then the berries can be mushed easily. So be aware of that. We talked about this already in one of the beginning slides, is serviceberry, Juneberry, Saskatoon, all the same family. There's tree types and shrub types that you can buy at local nurseries, we'll talk about later. But we have a lot of native plants as well. And we have 8 native species of serviceberries in Minnesota. And most counties have at least one species. And this is great because they're really tasty off the plant. They're not bitter like most of our berries are. Brushy areas near meadows, streams, edge of woodlands can be eaten raw, used in pies, muffins, jams, and cooking dishes. Gooseberries, and you'll notice one of these photographs, the upper or the middle part of the screen has little spines on the berry. So there's 4 native gooseberries. If you're a gooseberry hunter, then there you go. There's several that you can certainly hunt in the wild. Ripe gooseberry is excellent in baking desserts and sauces, rich in pectin, and used primarily for jams and jelly, and not usually eaten raw, especially the ones with the spines on it, but they're usually used for juices, those are, and made for jams and jellies. And you can see some of the softer skin gooseberries as well that are there on the screen. Wild raspberries, very nice plant that you can go through woodland, and even if your own backyard, sometimes if you have a larger landscape, you may have wild raspberries in your backyard or in your grove area or your woodland or windbreak. A black and red raspberry and blackberries. Black ripens earlier in the mid-summer, generally before the red raspberries, and the black considered to be many of the tastiest berries, but I think that's depending on the person, certainly. and typically 3 leaflets, and certainly they have barbs on them. If you're trying to walk through a raspberry patch, if it's close to mine, then you're going to rip up some of your pants and be kind of stuck together here. But the fruits are edible and very delicious. So wild raspberry is certainly a choice edible in the woods. Wanted to bring up spotted winged Drosophila is our invasive species. It's not native to North America or Minnesota. Found in Minnesota in 2012 in 29 counties, now statewide. This insect is attracted to ripe and healthy fruits. The males have a dark spot on the wings. Obviously, you're not going to see that because this is a fruit fly. This is a very tiny fly. Eggs are laid on the fruit. The larva eats the fruit. I don't need to tell you that the larva looks like a maggot. It's a little gross there. Overwinters as adult, active in summer, June to September. So our June berries maybe are a little bit before that, and maybe our honeyberries are producing before this period. But be aware of this SWD, spotted winged Drosophila, is a soft skinned type fruit attacking fruit fly that can affect a lot of these plants. Raspberries, blackberries, blueberries, cherries, plums, grapes, strawberries, except the not the June berries, the ever-bearing strawberries. So just be aware of that. And you can find out more information about the spotted winged Drosophila on our extension website or at MDA. Wild rice, I think some people harvest this, but you need a license to harvest it. Central and northern Minnesota, harvest by canoe, traditionally use the push poles and knockers. And I believe there's actually some educational camps that are available that you can learn more about. And actually, they actually teach you how to do this, which is pretty cool. I'd like to maybe attend one of those camps. And I think Explore Minnesota has references to some of those camps and trainings. Minnesota requires a license to harvest wild rice on public waters. And then obviously you cannot hunt or harvest unripened rice. It's unlawful to do that. So do not harvest before it's ripe. Obviously if it's on tribal lands, you need to be getting very much a lot of permission to do that. And a lot of tribes don't allow hunting and harvesting of wild rice on their land. Hazelnuts, wild hazelnuts. If you're thinking you might have some wild hazelnuts in your woodlands, you can look for these catkins in the lower right-hand side of your screen is called catkins, almost just like our willows that have catkins. That's the male part of the plant. The female part of the plant is a bright red flower there, close in the middle part of the screen. And that's where the nuts are going to be formed. The pollen is shed and those little hairs there that come out, these are very tiny little forming new. The female part is very tiny, and they get the catkin flower and pollen, and they form a nut with those little hairs that come out of that pink nodule. And then they can form clusters of 4 to 3 to 5 type of clusters you see there in the bottom left. And the covering of that is called the involucre. And then the nut is inside there. And then obviously you have to crack the nut to get the edible part of the hazelnut out. So American hazelnuts are native to Minnesota. We have the native in Minnesota, the woods. And then we also can plant hazelnuts. We have them at the nurseries now and farm stores, garden centers. You can actually plant 1 or 2 plants in your backyard. So pretty cool plant. And you can make your own Nutella with a little chocolate. Wild grape is a possibility, certainly in the wild. We have lots of different wild grapes out there, and you can make your juices and wines and jams and jellies and so forth with that. In early summer and full size, actually the leaves are tender enough and they are edible, and you can preserve those for later use. Actually, I don't think a lot of people eat the leaves, but maybe do. If you want to put that in the chat, go ahead. Balsa boughs. There's a DNR website that talks about harvesting balsa boughs. If you want to harvest it for your own use, you can harvest wreaths, and it's a particular way to do that. And certainly you need to look at the registrations. I think you need permits on public lands to gather these boughs, but it tells you how to harvest them. And usually after the second hard frost, usually in northeast and southeast Minnesota, where balsam tree grows, and you can follow those directions online. Another decorative that you could look at on mainly private lands, you can't really pick from public lands or the state lands, willows to make walking sticks or arrangements. Certainly we have a lot of willows and a lot of willows growing on private land. So if you have people that friends that you have that own land up in northern Minnesota or even southern Minnesota that have wetlands and so forth that have willows and native willows growing, you can make some decorative arrangements in the spring or fall and some winter baskets too in the fall. If you're interested in seed collection or cone collection, actually the DNR pays families and people to harvest seed in the fall. So you can look online. There's a website there that I'll have on that resource that we have at the end of the day and the email that will be sent out. And you can look at the restrictions and what's required and collect in paper bags, seasonal income, or you can just collect for your own use. But you do have to get permission to do that on public ground, public lands. Now we'll talk about the wild harvest, the landscape that you have in your own lawn or driveway even. So dandelions you probably thought were native. They're not. They're from Europe, and you can eat the roots and the leaves and the flowers, high in vitamin A, thiamine, riboflavin, all those good things, calcium, potassium in the spring. Obviously, as the plant gets older, you probably don't want to eat the leaves. You want to eat the young leaves and the young flowers, certainly. A lot of mine are heading out and forming seeds. So I missed that area, but usually we have dandelions almost blossoming there all times of the year. And it looks like you can make teas and remedy for heartburn and menstrual cramps. So there you go. Violets are edible. Actually, the most edible part of the violets, over 100 varieties in Minnesota, are the flowers. So if you want a decorative arrangement for your supper tonight, you want to pick some violets out there. I have some yellow violets around my place even now that's blooming. So leaves and blossoms, great salads, and you pick them fresh for salads or freeze. Plantain, how many knew plantain was an edible? It occurs mostly in driveways, actually, believe it or not. Native Americans named the plant meaning white man's foot. So they came over the European settlers, obviously European plant, not native to North America or United States. Pretty cool, but can be in salads, cooked greens, very young. Some become too stringy, certainly, but high in vitamin A and vitamin C and used in teas. So plantain. Daylilies, I just found this in researching last year, our first forage lesson, was that some of the daylilies are edible. And there's a website there in eating daylilies, which is very interesting. And you do not want to eat Easter lilies. That's a different family, a different genus species that's not edible. You don't want to eat Easter lilies. So if you got one Easter lily planted from Easter outside, don't try and eat that. Okay. Elderberry, very common in Minnesota, wild and also domesticated. You can buy elderberries at nurseries now for your home use and plant them in your yard. Dark berries, high in vitamin C, more than oranges, and great source of antioxidants. And some of the purple berries that we have are just great for health reasons and so forth. Cholesterol control and all kinds of health benefits. Makes into good juice and jellies and beverages and wines, I guess, too, right? Wild rose. So roots, Native Americans made tea for diarrhea, and then hips for fruit of the apple-like flavor, vitamin C, and jams and jellies. Again, flowers can be eaten raw or used in teas and jellies and syrups, and the leaves are used in teas, looks like. Wild rose. Acorns. So not all acorns are probably treated alike. This is bur oak, part of the white oak family. So Native Americans used the acorn from the bur oaks, the white oak family, to make flour, and often mixed with cornmeal and baked with basically that mix to form cakes and flour. And then it's used for coffees, and yeah, it's very good. But don't use the red oaks. So the bur oaks or the white oak family, that's the rounded leaves edges. So it's not the sharp edges of the oak leaves. So you want to look for oak trees that have the rounded edges. That's the white oaks and the bur oaks, mainly in southern Minnesota and up the central Minnesota. Cattails, and cattails has always been thought of as an edible, and almost all parts of this particular plant is edible at different times of the year. So roots can be cooked as vegetable, stems are roasted and boiled and cooked. Flowers in the springtime can be used when they're pollinating. They make cookies and muffins or a flour substitute. The spikes, when the flower heads or the little corn dog, it looks like, is green, can be boiled and eaten like a corn on the cob, which is kind of cool. The roots can be baked as a potato, but you want to peel the outer coverings first of the roots. And then Yule Gibbons, some of you older folks, they're on there, probably remember Yule Gibbons of grape nuts fame. If you don't, I think he's written some books on edibles. He was quoted, "If a man can find a stand of cattails, he will not want for food, shelter, or fuel at any time of the year." So that's pretty cool. Stinging nettles, most people wouldn't touch this with a 10-foot pole for eating, let alone walking through, but it's certainly edible. One of our edible plants. You don't want to you want to pick it with rubber gloves on, or leather gloves. Certainly, it does have stinging capabilities for the hairs on the stems, but you can boil that and boil the leaves, and it makes a great salad. You can also eat the seeds. Native Americans used it in the spring for other foods, and when plants were scarce, soak the needles in water or cook them to remove the stinging chemicals. And you can also eat the tops and make teas out of them. And there's recipes online, I think, for stinging nettles. Chokecherry, you've always heard that maybe it's poisonous. The seeds contain the cyanide. It can be poison, so you want to be careful about that. There's some recipes online and around that can use that, but certainly you can make jams and jellies out of it. Cooking does alleviate some of the process of the problems with that. But most of the berries are very much edible, but you need to be aware of that concern. Red clover, one of our European forages. It's not native to North America, but red clover is very common in most areas. And you can pick the flower heads and use the garnish of salads. Dried flower heads work into teas. And yeah, very nicely. They make me a nice salad for both the leaves and the flowers. So tips for foraging in the home landscape, certainly be aware and be knowledgeable about the area that you've selected for harvesting. And is it a park? Is it a part of a park? The area that you're looking at, always get permission if it's not owned by you. And if it's owned by a county or state or private person, certainly you want to get permission again. Be aware that if the area was used for herbicides or pesticides, and if they've been applying those particular chemicals in that area, you probably don't want to pick plants from those locations. And avoid farming fields or ditches. Avoid roadside ditches, especially with wild parsnips being around the state of Minnesota, very common. You can get a skin irritation with the sun reacting to the oils of the wild parsnips. If you've got shorts on, that's going to cause some blistering and so forth. It depends on the person, but a lot of people are reactive to wild parsnips. And then you certainly want to avoid areas where dogs have been. And then also if there's excess pollution in the area, you want to hunt for edibles there. Forest farming, really quickly, is the intentional use of manipulation and integration of intensive management of woodlands and capitalize on specific plant interactions to produce non-timber forest products. So here you see straw on the upper left-hand corner, maple syrup, shiitake mushrooms, or some of the mushrooms that are produced by logs in the shaded areas of the woodlands, also ginseng, and also a lot of medicinal type plants can be forest harvesting type of operation, if you've got some type of woods that can do that. If you want to look in the native plant communities classification from DNR, you can actually look at the historical records of what plants used to grow in your area, and you can find out what both trees and vegetative plants, understory plants, were fairly common in your area, even if you live in town, which is pretty cool. And this is, again, this reference is also in the reference that will be emailed out to you. Agroforestry is 5 practices, and forest farming is one of them. And I just wanted to let you know what that was. So agroforestry are 5 practices, intentional combining agriculture and working trees to create sustainable farming systems. Silvopasture, grazing livestock in woodlands, or Actually, if you're planting trees in open pasture, planting chestnuts or value-added trees, black walnuts, and then grazing livestock around that, that's silvo pasture. Alley cropping is kind of an alley cropping of crops and trees. Repairing forest buffers, and probably our most widely used agroforestry practices in Minnesota, especially Western Minnesota, is our windbreaks. So those are the 5 practices of agroforestry. Non-timber forest products you might hear about, which is a lot of edibles, floral greenery, wild edibles, medicinals, landscape wood, firewood, crafts, oils, any value-added products from our woods that's not lumber is called timber, non-timber forest products. So some of the non-timber forest products or the forest farming categories we have is medicinals, food products, decoratives, handicrafts. There you see pine straw again, shiitake mushrooms, the walking sticks, certainly a craft item. And then also the medicinals. And then down in the lower right-hand corner is chestnuts roasting over an open fire. How about that? And we're trying to get chestnuts growing in North America again, from the East Coast to the Midwest. And yeah, it's pretty cool. And then decoratives, red osier dogwood is a decorative in the middle there. Edible fruits and nuts, I'm going to end on that and then references really quickly. So here's back to our serviceberry, juneberry, saskatoons. You can purchase these as trees and shrubs or shrubs. There's tree types and shrub types. They may sucker around the landscape. So you may want to plant them in the backyard somewhere where you can let them kind of grow out a little bit, or transplant those sucker plants to somewhere else and in the landscape. But very good. If you've got kids or grandkids and want to plant something that's edible, this is your plant. So go to the nursery and garden center. We have them at rural farm garden centers as well. They have these available for people to buy. Currants, there's all kinds of currants out there. I've taken a picture of my red and black currants that I have. Mainly make them out of jams and jellies, or into jams and jellies. They're very tart, bitter when you're picking them off the plant fresh. But the saskatoons and juneberries are very sweet tasting and very good off the plant. Apples, we didn't discuss very much. Talk to your orchards in your area to see what apple varieties they recommend, or your nurseries, and certainly may want to consider an apple planting. American plum, there's different varieties of American plum that may work in your area. They also sucker, so they may go off your area intended to planting, so monitor those. Nanking cherry is being used in some of the food forests, the community food forests around the state, and that's an edible, certainly a possibility for adding to your landscape. And hazelnuts, hybrid American hazelnuts are available at nurseries that you can plant. I usually recommend that you get 2 shrubs of each variety. Most of these shrubs that we talk about and nut producing plants, you don't really, are self-pollinating, you don't need a pollinator, but it's always nice to have 2. American cranberry can sucker and seed off the property, so you want to make sure you plant those in an area that's okay. Black chokeberry, or some people call it aronia berry, high in antioxidants, another purple berry that's very good health-wise for you, that's available through nurseries right now. Elderberry, as we mentioned, there's a Minnesota elderberry co-op. If you're interested in growing a number of elderberries, they actually can sell you their varieties that they prefer. And then also they will purchase harvested sanes and actually flowers from you in the spring of the year, or in the midsummer when they're actually fruiting. Honeyberry is kind of a new kind of plant that's pretty new to Minnesota in the upper Midwest. It's kind of a Canadian a berry. It's also called blue honeysuckle and also haskap. So those are the 2 names that they go by. And it's really kind of a cross between a blueberry and a kind of a Saskatoon. It's pretty cool. But it's elongated. It's very good. But you have to be aware of the birds. And then most of these berries are produced underneath the limbs. But there's a very strong pollination chart that you've got to follow. So a tundra will not pollinate a borealis, but you need maybe a Cinderella will. So you need to know this before you buy them at the nursery. You got to make sure you got the right plant with the right pollinator to produce these honeyberries. But very cool and very edible. Nice little plant to have on your landscape. I know we're running up the time, Kelly. I have a few minutes left. Here's the chart for your backyard. Haskaps or honeyberry, Saskatoons you see there. Juneberry, serviceberry, Saskatoon, sour cherries, raspberries, grapes, also strawberries. Those are ever-bearing. Juneberries certainly maybe before that. Plums and apples. So you see kind of a chart there of edibles on the backyard plantings. Resources really quickly. We worked on a wild edibles types of documentation, and we have some of those online for extension. You maybe want to just do a search on the extension website, just do wild edibles. We've got a couple of them posted, and we hope to have more of them posted. Those are kind of backyard edibles or wild edibles. Here's Minnesota Seasons. It's kind of a neat nature type of website to see what's going on in the state of Minnesota on different seasons, what to look for in nature. If you haven't accessed Minnesota Wildflowers website, it's a great resource to learn more about all kinds of plants, from trees, shrubs, vines, ferns, grasses, and sedges all around Minnesota that are native. And even non-natives are there too. Ran across this Never a Goose Chase by Roy. It's a very interesting website that talks about some of the his foraging experiences and a reference, good reference. Cindy Hale of northern Minnesota, it's near Duluth area, has Clover Valley Farms, and she does a little video every once in a while. I think it's maybe every week this time of year, and certainly you can access that. And all of our web links here are going to be emailed out to you, so you don't need to copy them. This is Explore Minnesota and Foraging, and talks about some of the camps and some of the trainings that are around Minnesota, especially northern Minnesota, and maybe indigenous species or indigenous people and Native Americans, and how they might be using some of these forage type edibles and medicinals in use, daily use even now. Minnesota Mycological Society. If you're a mushroom hunter, you've got to access this and become a member. Also, there's a great website or actually field guide from the U.S. Forest Service on mushrooms. This is our Z-link to that PDF online. It's USFS mushrooms. And that link as well is going to be on there. Okay, now I'm going to just run through some few books here, Kelly, then we'll look at the questions. Look like we got a lot of them and we can't answer. Okay, here's Forager's Harvest, Nature's Garden, and this is also Samuel Thayer has written both those books. Another one is Wild Berries and Fruits, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. These references are also mentioned in the email that we'll send out to you. Midwest Foraging from Lisa Rose. And those are chestnuts there sitting in a very spiny husk that are protecting the chestnuts. Very interesting plant. Midwest Medicinal Plants, 109 wild herbs and for health and wellness. Very cool. Mushrooms of the Upper Midwest. Very popular book. And then the last reference here is How to Eat in Minnesota Woods, in the woods. We've got a reference that is the Minnesota Harvester Handbook that our forestry team and extension has put together over the years, and it's available through the University of Minnesota bookstore. These are some of the topics that we cover in that booklet. And then one more reference is the perennial fruit that was developed in Minnesota. This is online, and you can download what you want on the PDF. There's just some topics that they cover there. And so Z-links, they'll be covered in the email, but we talked about some of these earlier, and I'll give you my email, and I'm going to quit there. Kelly, I know we've got a lot of feedback, it looks like, from our attendees.
That's so true, Gary. Great information. Thank you. And there are a lot of questions in the Q&A right now. If we'd like to just start with, is it safe to forage greens from lawns and boulevards next to the street? And if so, how much distance away is recommended from the vehicles?
Wow, that's a great question. You know, if it's spring and they haven't applied any herbicides yet, I would, if they're applying herbicides on the boulevard, I wouldn't. But if they have not applied any herbicides, then it's probably, and it looks healthy, it's probably okay.
Great, thank you. And somebody's looking for a local group for foraging. Where would they go?
You know, there's a lot of Facebook sites that have some Facebook foraging sites. If you just Google some of the, or look on some of the Facebook sites or in the internet, I think you'll be able to find some. I think there's a lot of Facebook on the mushrooms too. So the Mycological Society, I think, has a Facebook login, and that'll be great resources too. I'm not sure. I have not done a lot of work on the online groups.
All right, thank you. And how long do pesticides stay in the soil?
Some stay in the soil a long time. It depends on the pesticide or herbicide, insecticide, whatever you're looking at. So we're probably most concerned about you're concerned about insecticides if there's an insecticide sprayed on edible, but certainly the herbicides will kill many of the edibles, depending on if it's a grass killer or a broadleaf killer. But yeah, it really depends on the herbicide. Glyphosate, the Roundup products really don't stay in the soil very long, but we have other products that do. So you want to be mindful of those and just ask some questions. If you're concerned about pesticide applications or herbicide applications in the area you're foraging, then you need to ask the owner or ask the people that manage that site.
Great, thank you. And I know that some of our friends need to leave and are leaving. So Rick is going to put an evaluation in the chat. So if you can do the evaluation, that's greatly appreciated. It will also, as Gary mentioned, there'll be a follow-up email. It will also be in the follow-up email along with those resources and these slides. And if you're looking for UMN wellness points, the 200 points, be sure to fill out that evaluation and you'll get more information about how to get those points and receive those points. The same as with the certificate. If you're looking for a certificate, please fill out the evaluation. And in 30 days, you'll receive another evaluation, a follow-up evaluation to ask how you've used the information as well as resources. And then you'll get a playlist of all of the recordings from this series on the family-friendly earth care. So on to more questions, Gary, if that's all right.
Sure.
Maria said she just found a golden oyster mushroom and she understands they're new to Minnesota. How do new mushrooms arrive here? And is climate change bringing in new wild edibles?
That's a very good question. We've talked about plants being moving up from the southern part of the states. Maybe we grow the Osage orange that's basically not known to be native or growing in Minnesota and so forth. A lot of different, and in fact, the bald cypress, I think Iowa State University is actually promoting bald cypress in Iowa, and that's like a Florida tree, and so I think mushrooms can be carried by almost any living thing. So maybe some of our waterfowl might be carrying some of those plants up and with seeds on their feet or on their wings, and yeah, so it's really hard to say. And actually, some of our plants might even be in the soil, maybe, and it just the right climate hasn't been eligible for it to seed and germinate yet. So maybe we've had some of these spores from mushrooms in the soil already, and just the climate has not been conducive to growing. A very good question.
So Rachel asks that she's she's on the edge of the woods that are sprayed for mosquitoes. So they try to avoid harvesting raspberries or hazelnuts at that edge of the forest. Is there any recommendation for cleaning them?
Right, you're harvesting hazelnuts toward the end of the fall time of the year. Hopefully they're not spraying mosquitoes at that time. I think the big key thing, hazelnuts are probably more protective than almost any other edible berry, because you've got an involucre husk that's protected to the nut, and then you're going to remove that, and then you're going to crack the nut to get into it. So I'm not really worried about the hazelnuts, but the edible fruits that you really need to wash off, any type of, especially spring fruits, if they're spraying right now, then you really need to just wash them thoroughly. We always say triple rinse on a lot of things, so triple rinse some of these products that you think might have had some spray. And yeah, you may want to try and avoid those fogged areas of mosquito spray.
Thank you. Somebody lives next to is in a nature preserved area. And are you allowed to pick dandelions and violets? Because there sure are a lot of them there.
If it's a nature preserved area, if it's a natural area on the state lands, then you're not. I don't believe so. As I showed you in the slide from DNR. But if it's a locally owned nature preserve or nature center, I would certainly ask the authorities or the people that manage that area. So just ask for permission.
Very good. Somebody's heard that the roots of the creeping bellflower is edible. Is that true?
Wow, I'm not sure about that. I know bellflower can be a problem in some landscapes. So I will say I don't know on that one.
Okay. Any information on garlic mustard?
Garlic mustard is edible. In fact, there's some recipes online, I think, to eat that. And that's an invasive species that's not native to North America, and yeah, taking over some of our understories. So it is an edible.
Okay. Do you have more information on forest farming or gardening?
Forest farming, yes, we've got oodles of information. There's actually on your email that will have a PDF. I put a link to the National Agroforestry Center, and that has a wealth of information, both handouts and information on forest farming. And actually, we've got some information on our university website. So extension.umn.edu/agroforestry should be able to get to our website that has more information on that and the 5 practices of agroforestry.
Excellent. And there's a lot of information and sharing in the chat. And somebody has asked if we can save the chat and send that, and we will do so. So you'll get the chat along with the PowerPoint and the resource list.
Good, and thanks people for sharing that other information or personal experience is always good, always good.
So what would you say is the best first step for someone new to foraging? And this would be on her own land.
I would say try and find somebody that's done it before, and figure out what you want to forage for. Try and identify what you're going to forage for, and that depends on what time of year that you're going to go hunting. Morel mushrooms is right now in southern Minnesota, and probably will be later in a few weeks up in northern Minnesota. So identify what you want to forage for, or maybe try and get with a neighbor or somebody interested in foraging and go out together.
Somebody asks, is it harmful to eat the fruits that have the flies?
No, actually, so when you pick a raspberry, what's left is the radical. And even on home raspberries that are grown, if you pick the raspberry and it should be clear or white. If it's tainted in any way, if it's like pink or colored in any way, reddish, then you've got probably a maggot, SWCD maggot in the raspberry you just picked off that radical. So that's an easy way to figure out if you've got SWD spotted winged Drosophila on your raspberry. And actually take 2 buckets. Take 1 bucket for throwaway and 1 bucket for keeps, because sanitation is the biggest deterrent of this fruit fly. It overwinters in the ground under the old type raspberries that were dropped off.
And Bill says it's extra protein.
Yes, that's true. You're right.
I asked about pesticides being farm pesticides from a restored farm field instead of the
okay.
pesticides.
So historic pesticides, I think you'd be all right. If the plant is growing healthy, you're probably okay. So most farmers have not used pesticides that stay in the ground for a long time. So I would say if the plant looks healthy, and if it's been farmed for many years around it, you're probably okay.
Right. Well, we've come to the end of the Q&A questions. Rick, are there any questions in the chat?
Yeah, there are quite a few that are repeats of what are in the question and answer, but one comment was that there are morels now in Lake of the Woods County.
Wow.
So things are popping very quickly.
Yes.
With a little bit warmer weather. The one question here is it safe to eat wild asparagus from near farm fields that haven't been sprayed?
Yeah, good question. As long as they, most of the sprays are pre-emergent sprays now that the people are spraying. And obviously you probably don't want to pick an asparagus that's like 2 foot away from the field. If it's more than that away from the field, hopefully it wouldn't be sprayed. But if it still looks good, I think if you wash it good enough, you should be okay. And obviously you want to pick asparagus when it's fairly young and short, like 6 inches tall or so. And we do have a lot of ditch asparagus, which is amazing to me. But you just want to be careful about if it's looking healthy. If it's crimped over in any way, shape, or form, then it's probably been touched by a herbicide.
Okay. There's a few questions about where to purchase shrubs and edible native plants.
Right. So actually, a lot of farm stores like Runnings out in some western Minnesota, a lot of their running stores have a garden center that produces a nursery stock that is a lot of edibles. Honeyberries I saw there, and then also Juneberry, Saskatoons, currants, all kinds of elderberry. And just go to your local garden centers or your garden centers, maybe in a bigger town close to you, or even smaller towns. I know Redwood Falls has a nice nursery that has a lot of edibles. It seems like the trend is these nurseries to actually offer plants that are edible for your backyard, fruits and nuts.
Okay. And going along with that idea of buying them, I need help deciding what to plant in my yard. Who is a good person to talk to? And what resources would there be to decide which ones would be good for a particular yard?
Right. You could contact maybe some master gardeners. Maybe you want to contact your county extension office in your county and ask if there's a master gardener group that's there in your county. And some of them are specialized in different aspects of horticulture, and edible gardens might be one of them, and flowers and trees and so forth. So I think that'd be a good reference to go to. And then maybe even the nursery that's close to you, they will have some idea of what would grow in your area, and probably may not come out to your landscape, but may make a service call and come out to your home. But I'd start with the master gardeners, and then the local nurseries, I think, would offer good suggestions.
Another one that shows up in the chat as far as the resources, the county soil and water conservation
Yes.
district
Yes.
will have sales oftentimes in the spring. I know in my county it's done with now, but for next year I could order plants.
That's right, Rick. Contact your local county soil and water conservation district and get on the mailing list for their tree program. If they have a tree program, or a neighboring county might have a tree program, they're not county specific. You can actually order trees across county lines. So yeah, they're an excellent resource for what trees will grow in your area. And then most of the SWCDs, Soil Water Conservation District offices, do offer a tree planting program, a tree sales program, but they actually sell trees in the springtime.
Right. One last question here. I'm scrolling through the chat. One of the earlier questions was, is there a look-alike to the elderberry that is not edible? And then another one asked how you tell the difference between edible elderberry and non-edible.
I don't know of any non-edible elderberries, especially the native elderberries. I'm not sure if that's a problem. So I think most of our elderberries, if not all of them, are edible. So I would definitely not eat a lot of them if you're concerned, but just eat a couple at a time and yeah, go from there. But I would say that most of our elderberries that I know of are very much edible.
And another reference that was sent to the hosts that's not going out to everyone would be the Wild Ones organization. I know there are some local wild ones, especially down in the cities, and those might be a good resource.
Yes, the Wild Ones website, you mean, and
Yes.
organization. Yes, very good reference. Yes.
Okay, and I think Kelly, did you want to?
There's one question about puffballs.
Okay.
Ooh. Puffballs, I think most puffballs, at least, well, I don't say most, but there are puffballs that are edible. I think you got to eat them before they become puffy. So make sure you obviously follow the regulations or rules on those. But I would look up some more information about puffballs, and there are edible puffballs out there. No question about it.
And then somebody is asking about purchasing permits. Where do we go? Where do we purchase the permits for foraging?
Right. The permits are mainly through the DNR. I would ask if you're into the state park and wanting to forage there, they can offer permits there. Look on their website. The DNR website, I think, has permits and licenses, especially for like the wild rice license. You can access the Minnesota DNR, and they have phone numbers that you can contact, and they should have information there that you can access, and they'll tell you a website to go to.
Excellent. Well, Gary, thank you so much for all of this information. It's so helpful and greatly appreciated. And Take care, everyone, and enjoy foraging.
Thank you.